Welcome everybody. Blake and David Henry here. Dropping in on a ceremony weekend in this beautiful land out here in California, exploring the realms of tension and all the good things.
Yeah, tension and release. Yeah.
So you were saying that maybe tension is just basically an inherent makeup of life.
Right? Like life is doing tension.
Yeah. Can you say more?
Yeah. Well, you were saying how like you wake up and there's like movement that wants to happen. And I was feeling like, yeah, that's me too, man. Moving every morning. It seems like life is wanting to move.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have like a active responsibility and to play a part in that movement and learn how to move with it, right? So that's like the morning practice and things like that, and not expecting that there's going to come a day where we need to stop doing those things because life's just, we reach that point where it's all good.
Yeah.
And I feel like for me, I've spent a lot of time kind of with that subtle expectation that there was that there in that way.
Yeah.
Where at some point I'd not need to go with the movement of life in that way. And that feels like a big thing actually for, I think, a lot of people. Versus this almost, it's like a harsher truth in a way. It's liberating, but it's also like, I think we resist really acknowledging that life will always be in movement in that way. There will always be tension to move. Yeah.
Yeah. It brings to mind this idea of arrivalism, that there's going to be like some moment in time in which things will complete themselves. And that idea is kind of dangerous in a way because, you know, there's this fixed endpoint or this idea that like in this period of time, or you get this a lot with like enlightenment teachings, but I think it shows up in all different sorts of psychologies where we kind of can just put ourselves in this state of mind where we think like, I'm going to arrive now and then I'll be done. And there's like no endpoint, and like that invitation into the infinity, that it's just going to keep going, that like life is going to keep unfolding and that there's always going to be more, I think is really interesting because there's kind of a paradox there between like fundamental truths, like spiritual reality, like the laws of nature, what persists to be true, like the constancy of change, and then like various ideas around like the nature of awareness, like what's fundamental about the nature of awareness, which in a lot of ways, in my experience, is pretty stable. Like there's something there to like rest into that doesn't change. And yet, like the display of life is constantly fluxing and changing and morphing. And it's like if you're not riding that current of life, then, you know, and get stuck, right? There'll be like a point at which you'll be like,
Totally. I just got such a beautiful visual when you were talking about the kind of the fundamental nature of awareness, consciousness. And yeah, it's beautiful. It's like life. I mean, it's the yin and the yang in a way, like that life is always moving. It's always moving, and then at the same time there is something so constant and always there. Always like always there and stable, like you were saying. And that's like, it's almost like that's the tool that life gave us to be able to be in the constant flow, constant flux. Because if there wasn't anything stable to come back to and rest into, we'd get lost in the flow of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really brings to mind like some of the interesting quagmires around identity And I think we've riffed on this in the past, but it's just so foundational. It's so fundamental, which is like that difference between like a growth mindset and like a fixed mindset. And like this idea, you know, in this particular weekend, we've been riffing a lot on like healing childhood developmental wounds, like moving through developmental arenas. Been feeling this intention around like the sacred habitat restoration for the sacred child, you know, like what is like the kind of natural way we want to evolve and progress through life. And it's really interesting to think about like these different identity structures that start in very early stages that are kind of like of the nature to be like crystallizing or calcifying or getting like stuck or fixed in a way that's so incongruent with like the life project itself, and like where we are like trying to do things, but then because like mom and dad are like crazy or angry, or there's like alcohol, or like the school system is like just overwhelming you and it's like developmentally inappropriate, or it's like misattuned, there's like these places where we like freeze and collapse and like kind of like die inside. Like parts of us are like, no, like I don't like this sucks, and then we're like, ah! And like those parts of ourselves like are not like pulsing with like the vibrancy of life, like, you know, like I feel like with, you know, this kind of teaching that we're in right now, where it's like the boa energy is just like the snake serpent power that's just like and there's this feeling like, oh, that's the pulse of life that like wants to move through our intestines like all the time. And it's like, you know, we were riffing on like how we all have like gut issues these days. Like it seems like so many people are in some kind of dysbiosis in their stomach and their gut, and it's just like, why is that? And it's like maybe like the way we were fed reality is like hard to stomach. You know, it's like maybe the way that like we're fed reality is hard to digest and metabolize. And so it feels like there's also this sort of like life teaching, like the project of water, like how it wants to flow in our lives, and how that's in like a really different dynamic than like the things that like get stuck and collapse and freeze and stagnate, or like you know, kind of harden, like literally harden inside of us and like toxify and then become like vectors of disease inside of our own bodies or inside of our society. And I feel like there's just so many different things that like disease like will like accumulate to itself, like heavy metals and microplastics, and then like developmental conditioning. It's like it becomes like these stuck vectors of like hurt and pain and dysfunction, and it's like to purge that, like to rid yourself of that, and to like get attuned to like what's actually life-giving is such a huge undertaking.
Totally. Yeah, I think something that I so appreciate about drinking medicine and being in these medicine spaces with in relationship to disease is that like I continually am learning to see just how connected our physical bodies are with everything else. Emotional health, psychological health. And it's something that that everyone will say, and like we cognitively understand that, oh, it's all connected. But how much do I actually feel that in every cell of my body and know that to be so incredibly true? Like, yeah, I feel like kind of what we're both going through with the stomach, for me at least, it's like, wow, this is so wild. And how these like certain patterns and these certain kind of like core wounds and things that we're holding feel like they're, most of the time, they are connected to something physically. I mean, it'd probably be safe to say at some level, always it's connected to something physically.
Yeah.
But, you know, like as we were talking about, as I'm unwinding this stuff around my lack of ability to really trust in life enough to where I can surrender to a season of winter and rest and nourishment and like letting go. And really it's letting myself receive, actually.
Yeah.
I think like winter is actually a season of receiving. And, yeah, as I'm doing that, I'm like, I feel like I'm getting to the core of some of the gut stuff that's been going on for me for so long. And, yeah, it's really mind-blowing. And I love what you said about the developmental stages. It's interesting to think about it in that, like, learning to live in the cycles of life and going with the grain of life. It does require us to have a certain capacity within ourselves to do that.
Yeah.
You know, trust and faith and also when you're doing that, like, we're tapping into life force energy coming through us. And on a nervous system level, like, that's a lot of energy to hold.
Yeah.
And not all of us have the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think about, like, that being one of the goals of development is actually, like, learning to attune to life.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, through different moments of cultivating resilience and knowing that someone's there for you in all, you know, all those different moments. It's like, that's what's allowing us to actually, like, show up
Right.
and commune with life.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Attuned, relational, healing intelligence, community, sangha is so important. Something I'm tripping out about right now is like this dichotomy between like life being so fragile and so vulnerable, like literally like there could be a nuclear war tomorrow and we'll all just like instantly die, or like a meteor comes and we'll be like instantly eviscerated. I had this moment last night and like the stars were like utterly beautiful and it's just like, wow, and you're like in that like mythopoetic landscape of just like, wow, I'm like a part of the human family and like we've been doing this for like hundreds of thousands of years of looking up at the sky. And then there was like this moment where it was like kind of looked like a shooting star, but it was a little bit brighter and it had more of a flash, and there was this instant moment of fear and panic where I was like, oh fuck, I could instantly die. I'd just be eviscerated. And it's just like everything I know and love just gone. And it's just like that profound feeling of like loneliness and isolation and just like, oh my God, I'm such a fragile human. And like just feeling within this context of like how beautiful it is to like come back into connection, like, okay, there's like a circle here and there's like solid people here and like we're all in this together. I'm not alone. And, like we got each other kind of feeling, like that sense of team and family and community is so good. And like that just sense of like, wow, like it is so intrinsically vulnerable. Like we all go through like the eye of the needle of death, kind of, I think, probably fundamentally alone. Like that's like a soul's journey, or, you know, I don't no fucking idea how it works, honestly. But, and death is really curious and just fragile, vulnerable, precious life. And then the dichotomy, which I'm just feeling with what you're saying around like winter and receiving, is it's like, we don't talk enough about how like life is fucking long too. It's like arduous. It's like a long fucking journey, you know, to like be in life, you know, and it's just like to go through the seasons like again and again and again and again. And it's like the cyclical existence again and again. And it's like in like the joy of life, it's like, fuck yeah, like paradise, let's go, heaven on earth, like infinitely, like I want to keep this going, like how good can it get? But like most of the time life is hard and it's like chop wood, carry water, and it's mundane. It's just like, damn, like most Sundays are not totally ecstatic. I mean, Sundays actually tend to be pretty good, but like Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, and like, man, if you don't sleep good for a couple nights and then you got like bills to pay, it's just like, fuck, it gets heavy so fast, and you just have to like keep going and like trudging through life. So I'm just like kind of putting a shout out there, just like, I don't think we get enough airtime for just like how fucking long life is, and like how much you have to like keep going through like arduous seasons that just like continue and persist, and like we got to keep going and going and going. So
yeah, it's such a good reminder. I think for the rest of my life, I will continually come back to that reminder of like just be so present, like soak up this moment so fully. You know, like I'm going to continue chasing something down the road. My past self dreamed of where I'm at right now, and yet I'm dreaming of another future self. And like, yeah, life is mostly made up of mundane moments of like these in between, living in the valley, not on the freaking high vista point all the time.
yeah.
And so it's such a good invitation for me to just like, how fully can I be here? If I fully embraced right now that this was the best it's ever gonna get, like, how much more would I lean into this moment and like find these different pockets of enjoyment?
Yeah.
Because there's like these different pockets of enjoyment that I have access to that I don't always lean into. There's like different qualities that I can show up in conversation with people that I don't always do, because I'm thinking about the next thing and the next thing. And so like, you know, I think it's something that ultimately we keep forgetting and keep returning to and getting better at, hopefully.
Yeah.
But like it's such a good reminder for me always.
Yeah.
And this trap of like kind of going back to the trap of believing that there is this end result.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my in my career or whatever it is that I'm constantly changing. And yeah, I had a beautiful moment with that last night, actually, of going back to what we were talking about around kind of these developmental stages for children, and how a lot of the time, like, we didn't receive the experiences and the attunement that we needed to where we could foster resilience and expand our capacity to handle different life situations and challenges. And now I'm here, 24 years old, like expecting myself to like have a fully thriving career and like have it all dialed in perfectly. When it's like, that's a lot. It's a lot to ask. And I'm 24 years old. Do I need to do that? There's like, because so many people say to me, "Oh, I wish I could be 24 again. I would just enjoy it, man." Totally. And I'm over here like trying to, go full CEO mode. And there's such a beautiful moment last night of giving myself permission to be a little bit messy, to be a little bit all over the place, to be 24 years old. And doing that though, while still, having this North Star of I know where I want to go, I know how I want to show up. But there's like this deeper layer of permission. And one other thing I want to say that I'm really excited to keep exploring this idea because it's super fascinating to me. But life is long, and something that I've been feeling into is like I don't know how much we can really speed it up, and the thought that we can like speed it up somehow feels like a bit of an illusion to me. And I think there's a lot of nuance to this. And like going back to what we talked about with these different, like the stomach stuff that we're dealing with. For me, it's been something that I've been dealing with for so long. But for whatever reason, now I feel like I'm actually getting to the root of it. And I'm excavating some of this trust wounding and things like that. And so like I've gotten the gut test. I've tried fixing my diet. Like I've tried a lot of things that I thought were gonna help. But like now that I'm sitting here, it's like, oh, all of those moments, all of those times were like leading to this time where it was finally ready to go. And like there's so many things in my life that I know are dysfunctional. Like I know that I'm not doing. And I know that at some point need to be repatterned. And yet I can't just sit down right now and repattern them. There's going to be a moment where like, oh, this is ready to go. And now this is ready to go. And the thing is like, we can help each other. We can have certain conversations, but like, and you might look at that as speeding it up, but I almost see that as like, and now we're having this conversation. We didn't have that conversation yesterday. Now we're having it. So there's this like wild layer of, and there's an invitation to soften into that, and to like rest into that, because it's like, this isn't on your timeline. And on one hand, that's scary because we want the control of it. But on the other hand, it's like lay down your sword, bro. You don't need to white knuckle your life. It's all happening. It's all unfolding. We have arrived in this moment, and now you're going to arrive at another moment later. And it was all meant to unfold in that way.
Preach, bro. It's so good. It's so true. It's so wild. It's so, it's just so wild, the kind of the hands that we're dealt in life, and then like the meaning that we get to make of it. And like learning to trust seasonality, learning to trust that there's a time and a place, and there's a rhythm, and there's a flow, and that there's a progression, and that things unfold, and that, sometimes stuff takes years. There's definitely like a strong impulse in this world to rush. And it's like, what are we rushing towards? It's just like looking at people's end games, like for real, it's like Elon Musk, he's like, he wants to go to Mars. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, all right. It's like, are we supposed to be like a multiplanetary species? And then I was like tripping out about like quantum computers. Quantum computers are fucking crazy. I don't think most people are aware of just like what a radically crazy game-changing situation quantum computers are, but it's kind of like, you know, whoever gets quantum computers first just wins. Like the whole AI supremacy thing, where it's like if the US gets it, they just shut everything else off around the world. It's like China's done, Russia's done, which is kind of crazy, right? Because it's like if the United States gets quantum computers, it's like, all right, like maybe they get to be the boss of the world now, and then everyone else is deactivated based on their terms. But if like China or Russia gets it, it's just like, okay, that'd be fucking wild because they could just deactivate and just like, you know, I don't know how those scenarios go down. But anyway, I don't know how I got on that particular tangent.
I mean, it is crazy. It's fucking crazy, and it's like we can talk about, you know, the seasons of life and all these, you know, beautiful things, and then you know, you throw in something like quantum computers, that like all these other things that are actually happening right now in our reality,
Right.
and it's cool, and it feels important to be able to like integrate it all.
Yeah.
Bring it all into an integrated lens.
Well, that's what kind of got me on that, was the rushing, right? Is this like, what are we rushing towards? And like really looking at our end games. Because it's like, yeah, we can go super integral and we can integrate all this technology in a good way. But it's like, I think the medicine really shows like we have lost so much in these deep roots that we come from. And I think like, you know, this kind of work that like we've been involved in this weekend, which I think is so important, is kind of that like nod to Terence McKenna of like the archaic revival. Like there's something deep, deep, deep within the magical and the mythical and like the dreaming of Mother Earth that has been so deeply lost. And even like this sort of mystical revelation of like the Big Bang might be like a kind of crappy creation story. I mean, it's like it could have like deep merit in terms of like certain kind of calculations with physics. But then, like, physics itself is up for grab, and like the most cool advanced theoretical physicists are like imagining multiple universes, like David Deutsch. It's just like, you know, it's like if you really like want to go down those rabbit holes, it's like there might be a multiversal situation, or it's like, you know, it's just like, well, why do we get so stuck in this idea that it like for sure was a Big Bang? It's just like, that's like the very beginning where like there's a Big Bang and I pledge allegiance to the flag every single day, and it's just like it's so indoctrinating. It's like we're all so brainwashed, and then it's just like, where did we really come from? And like, where are we really even going?
It's empty. It's so fucking empty, that view of who we are as a species and where we come from. Like it lacks soul.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help me live my life any better. It doesn't add any more meaning to my existence at all. I mean, it kind of just feeds into that like random coincidental reality that we live in. You know? And that's it's super interesting, because modern day humans have such a hard time with things like creation stories, because we're so stuck in the rational mind, because there's been such a break within like our mythological understanding and just like myth in our story. And whereas like creation stories, like I don't necessarily think people think like they're 100% word for word like factual material reality truth, but they're truth on another level. And a large part of the truth is like in the mythic landscape. And it's a hard thing for modern day humans to grasp that. To like feel that like, oh, that's truth. And it doesn't have to be fully rationally true. And there's like this leap. There's this leap, leaving our like castle with its fortress and venturing into the forest of myth. There's like this leap that has to take place, and like we need intuition to cross that bridge.
Yeah, it's really wild, like to feel like on a very core level of the human experience, like we don't actually know where we're going. Like people will like say like they know what's going to happen after you die, or there's like people who study like past lives or near-death experiences, And there's a lot of like interesting ways we kind of like grasp for information that we don't really have. And maybe we do have it. Like, you know, like there's people like Chris Bache who do like deep studies of past lives and like past life memories. That's super cool. That's super interesting. You know, it's like we have dreams and we have premonitions and we have intuitions and we divine. Like, I feel like divination and like the art of oracling is like coming in strong these days, because that's also like a way that we kind of navigate the mythos.
Yeah.
And like just to like really bow down to like, and we do we really know? Like, do we really actually know what reality is? And that's kind of where, like, with these, like, end game ideas or, like, people who have, like, some kind of set point, I'm just like, I don't think that that's how, like, reality really works, to, like, think that we know how it really is. And I guess, like, what gets me really lit these days is just, like, let me embrace being in a radical exploration of truth all the time. Like, help me just be in like healthy, life-giving disagreements and like weighing out what could be true based on the best information available. And I feel like that kind of like meritocracy of just like, I want to be in like the best conversation to get the best information available for that moment, so I can make like the best choice, knowing that there's always going to be a risk that I'm getting it wrong, or there's some blind spot that I have, or there's going to be some calculus that just like wasn't even equated. And that, you know, then the new moment will arrive and like infinity will be recreating itself again, and it'll be like, oh, like, and then to think like, to have the hubris or the arrogance to think like, oh, I had some kind of experience and now I have something figured out. I mean, it's like, how many people have made like tragic and like utterly catastrophic mistakes with that kind of mindset?
Right. Yeah, dude. It's fascinating, this new age world of like everyone's an oracle now. You know, like you go on YouTube and everyone's channeling. Like channeling.
Your feed, man.
No, it's actually my mom's feed.
It's your mom.
Seriously, my mom's all into it, like listening to all the past life regression stuff, all the channels, and like, oh my gosh, there's this one dude, and specifically, I'm not going to name it, who, you know, like every single YouTube title is like, channel predicts what's coming in 2025, every single one, all in caps.
Wow, yeah.
You know, and he's like blowing up. Like people are actually so hungry for that kind of stuff. And I'm really turned off by it.
Yeah.
I can see that there is some benefit to it. And I think, you know, like so many of these people have, you know, they present so much confidence with like, this is what happens when you die. This is what happens before you come into to Earth. Like all these things, and they all say something different.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you're saying. There's something reflective of like the modern day human's way of thinking and like needing that kind of control to like settle.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element that can be dangerous of that. Because I don't think we do know. And on some, like, I think having these conversations and maybe exploring, just like thought explorations can be fun.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're supposed to know. And there feels like there's this, like, okay, there's the oracles who say they know what's happening and people listening to it and like, oh, that's what happens when we die. But then there's this whole other, like, realm that I personally feel more connected to, which is like, for me, it feels like embracing the rawness of humanity. Yeah. The rawness of the human experience and like these earth-based practices. Like there's something that feels like very like angelic and airy about kind of like the oracle vibe. Yeah. But then there's something really earth-based about like embracing the humanness. And for me, it's like death is something that our ancestors have been holding and learning about and like trying to grok for thousands of years. And they were doing that through ritual, ecstatic practices, ceremony. Like they had stories. That's how they actually grokked death, is with stories and with myths. They didn't understand it rationally. You know, they didn't like say like, oh, now we know what happens with death. It was like, no, they didn't fucking know at all what happened with death. And they tried to make sense of it, but not in like this rational way of 1 + 1 = 2 in like a metaphorical mythic landscape. And and that's what I feel personally inspired to do, is like, I want to embrace the fuck out of the fact that death scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's happening, and I have feelings, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be able to make space for that. And there's like death is one of them.
Yeah.
But there's like, you know, all these different like themes of just what it means to be alive that we have to grok.
Yeah.
We have to sit with, we have to make sense of. And not make sense of as in like, I know the answer, but like chew on.
Yeah.
Death being one of them. Impermanence, like all these, you know, bigger themes. And, you know, I don't think the answer is finding an answer, but learning to actually hold it and chew on it and be okay with not having an answer. And making songs and stories and myths.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's such a potent transmission. And it reminds me of something Dustin said once that like really stuck with me about this idea that like different traditions invoke different realities. And like really feeling like last night, like the way in which like you can navigate these shamanic tapestries and like, you know, these different symbols, like, you know, the, I don't know, what are they called? Like the tapestries, the mantas, like, the, you know, the sacred images, like that those really do come alive. Like the song and the spirits and those dimensions are like a living, pulsing, breathing, spiritual plane of reality. And like, I think they are meant to be grokked. I think they're meant to be like surfed and navigated. I think it's like going out to the ocean and you're just like getting towed into the current. And you're just like, whoa, like this is like what life is doing. It's like pulsing these waves of vibrant life energy. And I feel like what's so wild is it's like people get so caught in like their particular version of reality, because I think the complexity of life is just terrifying. And it's just like, holy fucking shit, you can just feel like you're free falling through all these different traditions that say kind of different things but kind of similar things, and they invoke different realities. And so then this is the other thing that's just been so profound, because, you know, like we riff a lot on like attachment healing and relational healing and like being there for each other and like just like the strength and the vitality and the health and the goodness that brings, which is just like so foundational to have like good sangha and good community. Because there's like this other kind of archetype, which this was introduced to me by this guy named Brian, who's a great mentor, just like PhD somatic psychologist. Shout out to Brian Tierney. He might even watch this.
Shout out to Brian.
Brian Tierney. What's his podcast called? The Boundless Body. Yeah, so he had this great riff on the orphan. Like he's like really into Jungian psychology. And he has this riff on like the orphan and the orphaned child. And it's kind of this image that like we're all like kind of orphaned children to the Great Mother. Like we're all coming here and we're all like kind of like kids, and we're all like kind of like quivering in our boots, just like, oh God, like, you know, it's like it's cold out here in the cosmic furnace kind of thing. And it's like what literally like strengthens us is like joining together in arms, is like using our hearts to come into resonance, to like build each other up and be like, you know, it's like if we're alone as orphans, it's really scary and it's cold and it's dark and we're like, ah. But like when we join together and strengthen each other and like sing and dance and pray, like I love what you're saying so much. It was just like the rituals aspects of like what it is to like bring those back, like to really draw those from our ancient roots and bring them back and like have them infuse our lives. It's just like so utterly transformational. It's so utterly important. It's like literally like one of the currents that could like bring so much healing to like our friends and our family and our communities and our schools, and just like so what we need. And
I'll hold to that, brother. I'm feeling so much, such a huge invitation to just fully embrace what it means to be a human in its fullness, and building the infrastructure of our lives as individuals, but also as a species, around like creating space for these bigger themes, for these bigger feelings of being alive in a human body. And the orphan piece is so potent, because I think on some level we all feel that. There's this like deep place within our soul that can feel that. And something that's coming to mind, which is which I actually had the vision of a little while ago in a ceremony experience. And it was like this vision of the kind of like our cosmological story as humans. And again, it's not rationally true. I'm not saying that I know I know our story as humans now. It's like, this is a story that resonates for me.
Yeah.
And a part of that was seeing humans at some point, like, well, we were monkeys and we lived fully in connection with life force energy. We were one with life. There was no part of us that could perceive us as separate, as different, as other than everything else that's happening around us.
Yeah.
And then there was like a time where, we evolved these new prefrontal cortexes and this new experience of like consciousness in this way. And like when that happened, we were different. We had the capacity to perceive everything around us, and from that awareness of everything around us, also had the capacity to perceive ourselves as separate, as different. And so with that came a new responsibility, a new task, which is why earth-based cultures around the world practiced since the beginning of time, like these ritual spaces, these spaces where we could connect with life, with the animate force of reality, and be in trance. Be in trance, because when we're in trance, whether it's medicine, whether it's dance, whether it's vision quest, whatever it is, we are connecting to that same oneness that we felt before we evolved this new sense of separateness, of mind, of consciousness. And it's like this reminder, oh, we're not different, we're not separate. But then at some point we broke from those earth-based practices, and like that sense of being separate, that mind just continued to manifest. And it was like, so the way that I see where we're at right now is like we're living out the downstream effects of like the unintegrated mind. And so like even that in itself is like when we talk about embracing, and then from that space of embracing and acknowledging, creating space for, it's like embracing that we do have these minds that have the capacity to perceive ourselves as separate. The tree doesn't have that capacity, an ant doesn't have the capacity. They are fully one with life, and in some ways we are fully one with life too. And we have the capacity to see ourselves as not being fully one with life. So there's like that needs attention. We need to create space for that. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I really am fascinated by is like the individualism and like the soul. Because there is like this really interesting sort of dance between, I think, the sort of nuances of what you're saying around like, how did individuality emerge? And like we're in this primordial soup, and we have this deep tribal roots, and we have like our ancestry, and it's like out of all of that and like all the tragedy of everything we've lost, we have come into a place where we have more individualism. And I feel like that individualism is like a profound gift and blessing, and it's a super precious boon. Like I think it's like karmically excellent, and I think it's perilously challenging, and we're like figuring out like how do we like navigate as like, really appreciating like you've got like Blakeness going on, and I got like DH-ness going on. And like probably like our ancestors didn't really have as much of that. Like maybe like certain people, like the chief or some people were like a little bit more exalted, like, like the pharaoh in like Egypt, or like the king, or like certain people were like really starting to become like known as like a rising of the individual soul current. But we're definitely at a stage where it's like we're like an ecology of souls, where everyone is sort of like becoming known as an individual soul ecology, and like we refer to each person.
Fire truck.
I don't know. Yeah, we're referring to people individually, distinctly as souls. Whew, nothing like a siren to get your senses going.
We had to leave here last time because of a fire.
Yeah, whoa.
Yeah.
Can I try to land that plane for a second?
Yeah, I want to riff on that with you.
Yeah. So, that was interesting. Symbolism and stuff. Yeah, so like the initiatory peril, the dangers of becoming souls, and then the idea that really I find fascinating from the visionary Chris Beisch is this idea that like the soul is still evolving and it's going to like exalt into like sort of like a masterful form. I think he calls it the diamond soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of like this interesting play, right, between like really exalting and honoring our individuality, but then like really harnessing like this sort of super integral mindset where we're like also still in the communitas, like we're still in the sangha, we're still in the collective, and like hopefully getting the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's fascinating to think about, like the modern era that we are in. I think we are experiencing like individuality in a completely different way. Like you're saying, maybe the chief or the pharaoh, but like this idea of, what do you want to do with your life? Who do you want to be? Connecting with your dharma, like bringing that into the world. That like, in some ways, this is like a new experience. Like, and yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, and then thinking about the grander arcs of like life's evolution over time, and that like this quest to individuate while still being a part of a community and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this is the next precipice of human evolution on like a grander like like the soul of the world vibe. Like just this grand collective heart of life that's like evolving and yearning to grow. It's like this is that next step. People who are being born into cycles and cycles of trauma, and like who are breaking those cycles and who are connecting more with who they are and that place within them that wants to become.
Yeah.
I think about like the energy of the acorn becoming the oak tree, like that discharge.
Yeah.
It's like that is just straight food for that like soul of the world, for the soul of like the heart of life.
Yeah.
So every single time that someone steps more into the oak tree, it's just like feeding that life. And that's like you're saying, like anciently maybe we were born into a tribe and you had your role, but like this quest of like fully individuating, and it is new and it's so freaking beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so gorgeous. I'm so happy to be born in this time where that is the case, and there are these it's challenging in certain ways, and like we don't have structures that are fully like supporting that.
Totally, man. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we probably should pause soon because I'm starting to get hungry and we got to land the plane eventually.
Yeah.
But to bookmark, I think one of the things that's really fascinating and challenging and perilous about this individuation, this soul's journey, and this like the ecology we find ourselves in is this theme we've riffed on in the past, and that I just feel like is going to keep being a massive theme for so many men and women, is just like how sexuality comes into play. And like I feel like there's so much hungry ghost seeking in like the realm of like dating apps and people who have like gotten into this mindset around like, who's my person and where's my person, and is there someone better, or is the grass always greener? Because there's this feeling like there's this like millions of people, and it's like, where's my person? And I could always find someone better. And I think like with the whole themes around like pornography and just like the like just like surplus of human bodies, there's something about like the way that we can become so lost and fixated on the search for more rather than like the finding and the resting into what is actually ours. And so there's some kind of interesting interplay. I know this is kind of like a wild tangential riff, but like between like healthy, integrated, safe, sane sexuality resting into our natural inheritance and like what is ours and actually ours, and like the quest for self-discovery and like the new frontiers. I don't know how all those get braided together, but somehow they feel all super important to me. And I think there's something about like the movement into like healthy, heart-centered masculinity that has all these like profound tie-ins with like movement into more like radical transparency and movement into safer and saner and more like integrity-filled sexuality, and like men discovering right use of how to pleasure themselves and like how to like circulate pleasure in our ecosystem in a way that's like safe and healthy and like copacetic with like people's like boundaries and relationships and like marital statuses and like all these like fascinating enigmas that are like in some ways a part of artifacts of the past, like the conventions of marriage, and so many people are exploring new modalities, but then also too that there's like really sacred like commitments and conventions that also go along with like people discovering things and then making like vows and commitments to those things. And just throwing all that out on the table.
Yeah, well, that feels like the perfect pickup for part 2 of this conversation to go deep in that. But what I will say about that for now is like, in some ways, I feel like this conversation today was like a map of our current time, and like some of these bigger pieces that, you know, need space to be made for them. And you know, the journey of individuation and doing that while staying connected to these earth-based practices and holding these bigger questions and sexuality is such a core piece to who we are. It's like, you know, the more that I go into it, I feel like it's one of those like root parts of of our being. And so like, you know, it feels like the head of the dam that all of the water of our life is flowing through. And so when that dam's polluted, you know, all the water that's flowing through it has that same pollution in it, versus when it's like integrated and clean and clear, it's like, it's beautiful. And that's informing our entire like expression in life. And so it feels like a massive part of where we're at. And our culture is so lost in the realm of sexuality and pleasure and, you know, eroticism. And so, yeah, I think as much as we can sound that alarm, like to bring further integration to that realm, the better, because we need it so badly.
Oh man. And like, I love that image so much of it, like being like the head of the dam that which all the waters of our creative, our emotions flow through. That is so right on. I feel like that's so true. And like so many of us, myself included, I'll speak for myself, that like basic understanding of like human anatomy and like how emotion and creativity flows is like completely absent. And it's just like that kind of remembrance, that kind of imagery, that kind of clarity, so valuable. So valuable.
Well, thank you for this beautiful conversation, my brother. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. I hope it was nourishing conversation. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and you'll have to tune in to catch part 2. So there's a lot of juiciness to still be explored.